Hello, and welcome to the third episode of our Elevating Events for Omnichannel Engagement series. Events are one of the richest channel for healthcare professional engagement in life sciences, and yet one of the most neglected in pharma omnichannel. And our mission here in this series is to help marketing, brand, medical, and event practitioner bring events to the omni-channel table next to emails, rep visits, and HCP portal, and later on execute world-class events and in-person and virtual events that delights HCPs and augment CRM record with the data that the field needs. And hopefully that marketer also can use to craft relevant conversation. So if you are a head of omnichannel engagement, if you're a product owner for events or product owner for CRM, or if you're in congress and meetings and events, this session is for you. And in this specific session, we'll be discussing how practitioner, you, the people who are pressing the buttons in omnichannel, can make things happen beyond all the hype that we are hearing around Omni. And by the way, the first thing we're going to be doing today is asking you, what is your role? So I'm going to be launching a quick poll. If you can take a second to help us better understand who is attending, that would be great. My name is Pierre Metrailler, and I'm your host today. This episode is brought to you by SpotMe Life Sciences, and today we are digging specifically into how CRM, omnichannel, and events are tightly related, and what are the key considerations when thinking events and CRM. And today I am joined by Chris Wade from Exeevo. Chris, who needs no introduction, but I still doing this introduction because I'm very honored to have Chris joining. Chris is recognized in the life science industry as a forward thinker leader in the customer experience and in the digital space. For over 20 years, he has helped life science companies improve their customer operations by applying advanced technology. And he actually told me all the stories behind that technology that he's gone through, applying technology to facilitate improved capabilities across the commercial domain. As an AVP, strategic solution at Exeevo, his focus is on building the next generation technology platforms that transform the business experience for customers, patients, and employees. And a few words about Exeevo. Exeevo empowers life sciences organization with a next generation intelligent customer solution that navigates the complexities of modern healthcare. Their solution help forge deep, meaningful, and personalized connection that elevate organization to new heights of efficiency, customer engagement, and commercial success. Welcome, Chris. Good to have you with us today. How are you?
Thanks, Pierre. Great to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
Excellent. And by the way, we are seeing. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to share the results so that we can have that. We have a very strong marketing and commercial excellence digital omnichannel audience. We have some folks from medical and some folks from congress meetings and events. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. So
it sounds like we've got everybody in the room, which is
we got everybody in the room. Absolutely, Chris. Hey, Chris, first question. I mean, we've talked about Exeevo and we've talked about your career, but thinking of Exeevo, why another CRM?
Very good question. I think the history of CRM in our industry has, been one of creeping improvement. So, when I started, it was all about territory management, about you've got a big complex sales structure. You need to make sure that people have got the right, HCPs, that they can record their calls, and so on. But there was no engagement. It wasn't about multi-channel. This is all sort of way before then. Then multi-channel came about, and helping those field teams, manage the content that they were going to be using to support their direct, face-to-face engagements. And obviously, we saw that extend into the email domain through, the kind of various rep-triggered emailing solutions, and then ultimately that sort of connection between what field teams were doing in terms of their direct engagement, but also the redirection that sort of kind of connect their customers to, activities taking place elsewhere in the business, events being, a great example. But of course, at the same time, we've had the emergence of omni-channel I think both as a general concept, but also specifically in our industry, as often being something which was distinct from CRM and owned by typically marketing, and focused very much on digital touch points.
And that's like the website, the emails, and
Exactly.
all that stuff, right?
All of that good stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem, of course, was that you've effectively now got sort of two universes of customers, and a great challenge was, I want to be able to have a 360 view of my customer. That
Wait, when you say two universe, you mean like marketing and commercial? Is that how
exactly?
Okay.
Or omni-channel and CRM. Let's put J. So you effectively have
yeah,
two stacks.
decide which one is which one now. Okay.
Exactly. And then the great challenge was do we want to integrate those? How do we integrate those? How do we actually put ourselves, keep thinking about, if we're with a customer, would I be confused? Would I find this seamless, helpful, relevant? If I only effectively have half the picture. And I guess that's where, in my career, I saw, a lot of, organizations having lots of challenges around how to do that. Different approaches. Often you'd see a lot of focus on, building out a data lake or a data warehousing kind of structure. So the information from CRM and the omni-channel, platform would come together and try and make sense of it.
And it's interesting that you mentioning the data lake or the data warehouse, because what I'm seeing a lot, and that's coming from the event perspective, is people are not able to make that decision, or whether it's marketing or omni-channel, and to avoid making that difficult decision where they basically says like, let's build the third thing, which is the data lake, and which has little to do with any of that stuff, but at least we have the data somewhere. But unfortunately, what we've seen, and it's pretty sad, right? You see these projects for 1 year or 2 years where people do that, and then you're like, hey, can we get a dashboard out of this? It's like, well, no, data is not consistent. So yeah, totally see that. Totally.
Yeah. And I think and I guess that's where, where Exeevo came in, was really a reaction to, where we saw the industry today, that what you typically would have is 2, 3, even more, core solutions, application solutions being deployed. CRM was essentially still a field-focused, objective. And then you'd have marketing automation. You'd probably have, the sort of CMS structure or your digital sort of architecture for managing portals and things like that.
All the website and all that stuff. Yeah.
And content, of course, sits behind it. Data sits behind it, analytics and so on. So you have a very complex environment, which, of course, as well as being complicated, it gets expensive, because each of these different systems is coming from a different vendor. You've got all the licensing around that, all the maintenance around that. Of course, you've got the complexity of how do I integrate that, and how do I make sense of what I'm actually ultimately, how does this help me? I've got all of these different systems. I've got data being replicated or integrated, insights being shared, but is it actually helping, the people who work across my organization in either as customer facing roles or customer organizing roles to do their job better, because they have, at their fingertips that, a natural 360 view.
Right.
And I guess, we're able to do that as Exeevo, largely through our partnership with Microsoft. So I guess, unlike
and that was the thing, because and by the way, I should mention this to the audience, because we sort of, it wasn't clickbait. We're actually going to talk about events, right? Just to be clear. But of course, to have the opportunity to get Chris into the episode today. Now, I had a great discovery on Exeevo, and there's a lot of interesting things. But one thing that I discovered, which I didn't know, I guess I wasn't properly educated, is that it's essentially Microsoft behind it. So what's different with Microsoft?
I think, well, lots of things are different, as you'd kind of expect. They are, I guess, fierce competitors with, with Salesforce. They, I guess what really differentiated it for me when I was sort of looking at joining Exeevo was the reality of their customer architecture is built around a common data platform or a single cloud model. So instead of having, effectively, if you're familiar with the Salesforce architecture, you have different clouds. depending if I'm looking at sales, service, or marketing. They are essentially different solutions.
There were three different products to start with.
Exactly. They came about through different acquisitions.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's a lot going on at the Salesforce end when you look at what they're doing with Einstein 1 and stuff like that to sort of address that fragmentation. But it's going to be a big lift, and it's going to cost a lot to buy into that ecosystem. Whereas the Microsoft architecture, so what we call Dynamics 365, if people are familiar with that, and likewise Power Platform is sort of like the sister solution. Is they're built over something called Dataverse. Dataverse is a common data platform. So basically think about, instead of having lots of different data models for supporting all of my different business systems, I've got one data model. And wrapped around that is my sort of global definitions around things like my business rules, my data permissions and security. And the other end of it, is, which is possibly a little bit esoteric, is the Microsoft solution sits within a customer's own tenant. So if you think about Office, Outlook, Teams, those sorts of sort of general tools that every organization has, they are run within each company's own Microsoft tenant. So effectively, it's a corporate cloud that is secure.
And I assume you have full control on data residency. Where does this sit? And so
Precisely.
If you're thinking about, and I think you have some deployment stories later on. I think that was one of the key criteria. Okay.
It is because it's sort of like you have, and I think one of the key things we'll see, going forward, particularly as we look at the impact of generative AI, is effectively the CRM system, instead of sitting outside the organization, as it does essentially, today in most companies, so CRM is being run externally, is the CRM system, the CRM environment, if it's within the company's own tenant, within their cloud, it makes it far easier to connect to individuals, to leverage, to look at collaboration with, employees as well as with customers. And I think that's often been the part of a kind of like the unfulfilled promise in our industry, is that we think about CRM purely in terms of the external customer, not in terms of the internal customers. And of course, as you said in the intro, we've got people from a range of different business functions. And what is one of the eternal challenges we write white papers on and post about LinkedIn, multiple times a week? It's about, lack of collaboration, about those, barriers between business functions, which we really struggle to resolve, in part. And this is where I was getting into the great technology debate, because we look at technology as being part of the silo rather than something which is, across, how we operate.
Now, Chris, it's interesting because you're right. Most of the, well, not most, but the most recent books on pharma omnichannel, but also all the posts that we see, they all pretty much say, hey, it's great, the tech, but first you have to think about the human beings behind this. You have to think on how you're enrolling the field teams, etc. So, and you're saying, okay, part of it is like, that's something we address. So now you talked about the unmet promise of the CRM. Now let's discuss architecture. How does the platform deliver on that unmet promise?
Sure. So, as sort of, touched on, if you think about your CRM as being how you support your customer-facing, customer organizing functions, and there are lots of them. Think about even just in one part of the business, we think about, the commercial organization across sales, sales and marketing. There are many roles in there which all rely on information about customers and the ability to either use that to guide how we engage, or use that to build plans about how we support. And it can't be, we have to move away from the sort of, artificially siloing our customer solutions around, different departments or different functions.
Like commercial and medical, for example, or commercial and marketing.
Precisely. The reality is, the sophistication of the sort of business rules and security rules around data governance, who can see what, these are the same rules that are applied, across, for example, in R&D. is Azure, which is essentially Microsoft's cloud database service that is really heavily used, in many life sciences companies, particularly in R&D today, because very, very powerful.
You're saying it's not the excuse is not good enough.
It's not. Okay. And of course and often this is where I love having the sort of debates with peers around, when we think about the people, process, technology discussion, it's like they have to be equal partners. And I think too often technology is either seen as like, oh, well, this is the latest thing that we're doing to support what we want to do, in this part of the business.
Yeah.
But often we struggle to take a few steps back and look holistically to say, are we actually approaching this from a whole business perspective?
Right.
And I think this is, and then we start to sort of, we will get into events, but there are so many sort of points of redirection around, something which is seen as a really critical activity for a healthcare professional. They have a career-long need to learn. These are people who are highly trained, highly intelligent. They're curious. They want to learn what's new. I came across a stat, on the relevance of information on clinical research versus the relevance of information from industry sources, and it was about 90% on clinical information. So we think about trial data, clinical reprints, things like that, versus about 7% for the content, which often we put an enormous amount of focus in creating, but actually it's not necessarily what customers are wanting to see as the norm. They're under a lot of pressure, but they need to learn, and so they need to use their time very, very effectively. And events, of course, are a great way of doing that. Particularly if you've got that sort of flexibility over, is it live, is it asynchronous, is it on demand, and the like.
Now, so Chris, so now the one thing though, because it's the next, when I first heard about Exeevo, and I was like, okay, great. Now changing a CRM, that's like, moving a mountain, right? Now you did score some initial wins. So something you can talk about?
Yeah, it's in the public domain. So where we're working today, we work with one of our very first customer was in South Asia. That was with Sanofi, and because a lot of our engineering team, where we came from was, we grew from Indegene. Was sort of up, at one point we were part of Indegene Group, and now we separated out. So we started in South Asia. We expanded into Europe with Daiichi Sankyo, and that's been an ongoing program with them. And interestingly for them, it started off with the sort of traditional field piece. They needed a new field application because their existing system was at end of life. But the reason they chose, or a big part of the reason they chose Exeevo over, I suppose, what most other companies are using today, is they knew they wanted to go towards omnichannel. They knew that was something which was important to their business. And the idea of doing that, with multiple systems, when you could do it with a unified solution, made a lot of sense. So that idea that, when I've got that sort of customer 360, it's not just for a rep to benefit from, it also benefits my medical team, it benefits my marketing team, or particularly marketing, because they have responsibility for the whole customer universe, essentially for the market. They need to be able to see what, all of the information that you have about every HCP that you have identified, not just the target customers who your field teams are going to focus on.
The bigger universe that you've
exactly. So when they're designing programs, when they're designing campaigns, they want to do that with omni-channel as its foundation. And if it means that for certain audences, yes, I will break out and sort of develop a substream essentially.
And that's quite logical if you think about it. Like, okay, I'm thinking of it from a marketing perspective, not just from a commercial that you think of.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what always sort of catches me is when I hear somebody saying, oh, we've got an omni-channel medical program or an omni-channel sales program or marketing program. You can't put that other word after it. It's, either you have an omni-channel program or you don't. As soon as you go into, a siloed business function, it's not omni-channel. Because think about it put yourself in your customer's shoes.
So we'll keep that for the next. We'll keep that for the next person who claims, to be doing omni-channel commercial. So now, thinking of this idea of like the bigger universe, and I think this is great because that's a great segue for us going into events, which is what we do at SPARMI. Now, I want to focus, and that's what I really wanted to have you here on this episode, because listening to you, it's also enlightening from your 20-year perspective. Now, if we focus on the issue of putting events into the CRM, and yes, events is of course one to few, which I think people are very familiar with, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Teams, but I'm more thinking of larger ones, 10 plus people up to webinar, in person, etc., congresses, satellites, and the like. So now, the question is, why does it matter so much to put events in the CRM? And it seems like there are many people that are focused on this idea today.
I think the simplest answer to me is that events are a critical a critical part of building experience, and because experience doesn't have a start or an end, we have to look at an event in this context of, is this helping us build a stronger experience for our customers, but also where does it take us next? And I think it's been really, I guess in the early days it was I'm going to use my CRM solution to help direct people, either identify people and then invite them to join an event. And the sort of question was never what happens next.
So it was a nomination tool to get people in, right?
And that was
it was never like, how do I feed back into it?
Yeah, and that was a big step forward, no doubt about it, because before that, it was like events were effectively almost felt like being run. There would be a discrete team running them. It would be,
often an agency running this.
Here's a flyer, kind of hand this out to your customers to see if they'd like to register. So that idea of just, building some simple points of connection between, and using, an event as, whether it's as a hook or as a call to action, really effective. But the problem was always that as soon as you did that, you were basically, from a data perspective, you were pushing the customer outside the CRM. So they were doing something somewhere else and you never really knew what it was. And if we go back to the idea of not so much maybe thinking about this as a CRM in the way we've thought about it in the past, as like essentially the rep system or the field system, but instead, this is the platform we design, manage, and execute omni-channel engagement. So that event will have people who we've referred to it, and hopefully they've looked at it. You can see that. Hopefully they've registered, and hopefully they're
people who registered, people who actually came.
But also critically, I mean, if you look at other sectors, they see events as a critical part of lead generation. And the whole idea of a pipeline, I know it's sort of tended not to have much currency in our industry. I think that's wrong, but because I think it's vitally important that we think about, when we think about designing a customer journey, the end point is not like something that they're doing. The end point is the start of the next phase.
And it's interesting the way you describe this, because I 100% relate. I can 100% relate to this, because we're always having those discussions on, like, let's take this webinar, for example. Yes. And if we were executing this webinar in the classical, I would say, commercial, setup in life sciences today, the way we would have done is that we would have gone into the CRM and selected the list of, contacts, accounts, whatever you want to call this, and send them some sort of an invite. Could be a marketing blast, or it could be a rep-triggered email. But that would be a relatively small audience. And the conversion, by the way, of that audience would be very high. But if you think now, and I look at here at SPARMI, right? I don't know, maybe in our marketing database, we have 50,000 contact. That's the marketing platform. In the CRM, we only have a fraction of this. But of course, whom do we send an invite to? To the marketing audience, right? I mean, to a segment of the marketing audience.
Yeah.
And the reason is why, because it's a bigger reach. And when we talk to, pharma customers, some of them do it, interestingly often at the affiliate level. But what we often get as an answer is like, no, we can only send to the CRM, meaning that the audiences remain quite small for the investment that you're making.
Exactly. So, so when you think about who is, that the customer platform, that is everybody.
Yeah.
But within that,
everybody, right? So
that's every, as the more the merrier, because you will have, people coming to, for example, whether it's from, say, medical information, they're lodging, making inquiries, they're making, they're asking questions. Instead of that being sort of, in another department, in another building, in another city, it's something which it is inherently coming into that same view. And I guess I think it's probably, it's kind of like, and this is where, if we think about the impact that generative AI looks likely to have, and we've seen, I'm sure, in most of the people on this call, their organizations are starting to deploy generative AI solutions in the forms of, think about Copilot. So whether it's in Office, whether it's in Outlook or Teams, the same concept exists within the Microsoft CRM architecture. So when we think about, and that's what, as we're building on that, both leveraging what Microsoft is delivering out of the box as, sort of standard, productivity support tools, sort of which are geared to the specific, application itself or the module. But then the ability to design new ones. So when we think about, how do I design support tools or, the sort of Gen AI powered assistants that would help a marketer versus a totally different, set of requirements for helping a commercial manager or a key account manager or somebody in medical affairs.
The difference is that it will be with the context of what you have in the
exactly. And I think because particularly modern events, we think about the richness of that digital experience now. It's not like joining a team session where it's just a couple of people talking and maybe showing some slides.
Right.
If you've got many parts to that, which can be brought to life, pre-event, during the event, after the event, that people can go back and can access recordings or look at supporting materials, all of that stuff. That is gold dust in terms of understanding,
who they are and what they want,
what your customers want.
And to your point about relevance earlier, it gives you unique insights on relevance.
Yes.
Now, Chris, one thing, we're coming to the end of this session. We keep this to 30 minutes. By the way, any questions, make sure to share it. We'll take them with Chris. Now, from your 20-year experience, and I'm talking here from a pure IT perspective, the CRM is one of the most guarded, I call it fortress, one of the most guarded property in IT, in commercial pharma. And this is an issue for a lot of commercial leaders who are trying to use it to orchestrate HCP touchpoint, especially with events, right? That's often like, okay, we have this great concept. It's a high level. How do you break into the fortress?
Well, I don't think I don't know if there's a magic key. I haven't found it yet. But I suppose we've seen it. We've seen it change before. When I first started back in the late 90s, I worked for Dendrite. Dendrite got acquired by Cegedim. Dendrite got acquired by IMS. They both lost a huge amount of their business to Siebel. Back in the early 2000s, that's what all of the the enterprise pharma companies were all Siebel customers. And of course, obviously we've seen that shift in favor of predominantly Viva. So there is whilst things might look very fortressy, hard.
So your answer is I mean, it's a fortress for historical reason, but there's more and more pressure for people to come in, and naturally this is going to force people to open up.
And in our own experience, we've seen this on the work we do in the medtech side. It is, I suppose, as a sector, a little bit more margin sensitive. So, where we've been talking, working with some of the, one of the largest organizations in the medtech space has, the starting point was, yes, they had a a particular use case they were struggling to resolve. But that very quickly moved from, a solution to do a specific thing to a much, broader and deeper conversation around consolidating their, the complexity of this sort of this customer architecture, but also consolidating their investment. Because, if you're the CFO and, you're looking at who are my biggest suppliers, the further up you go on that list, the more, the more focus is going to come down on, are we getting value for money, on that. So, for us, that's at the core of the concept of, of omnichannel, as we've touched on. But we also see this what we think is going to be a very fast moving change from a traditional model, which is, I guess, very app centric, to the impact that generative AI is going to have on how people actually do their jobs. So rather than needing to be an expert on 15 different tools, if I can ask the question, if I'm an expert on my job, I'm an expert on my customers, I'm an expert on my data, the data around that, then that ability to actually automate or replace what is sort of like fiddling around on a screen for hours, building a customer journey, to describing via prompts, a really, really good customer journey with clear outcomes and information about the target audiences. And essentially, instead of needing to, be dragging things around the screen for days on end, it's actually creating that. And we think, though these kinds of advances in productivity will demand that organizations, they have to be able to manage their information holistically. They have to be able to manage their customer functions in a far more cross.
So hence this architecture prerequisite that you made it very clear. Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining us today. We're coming to the end of this episode of Elevating Events for Omnichannel Engagement. If you want to learn more about Exeevo, who is your first point of contact. This is Chris, or here is also their URL as well. Thinking of what's going on the SpotMe side, you can always check out our Life Science Event Insights Hub, where we have all the videos, the past videos from the prior episodes. And now, one thing, if you are into the Congress, specifically into the Congress ecosystem, and whether you're in commercial or medical, by the way, next week we'll be in Tampa, Florida, at the Pharma Forum 2024, the US Pharma Forum 2024, and we'll be unveiling our new Congress suite, our Congress Excellence Suite. So if you are at Pharma Forum, please join us and pay a quick visit on the booth. We'll also be hosting a keynote session. If you're not able to attend, make sure to sign up to our newsletter to get the latest, or connect with one of your SpotMe reps to get a demo of that new solution. And then what's going to happen next is that we are going to have a session on April 11th on the must-have for integrating an event platform with your CRM. And I'm going to be joined by Jenna Sherlock, who is the Director of CRM Events Management at Viva. And together we'll be continuing on I would say, what needs to be done, on the ground, on the nitty-gritty. We'll actually go very deep into the nitty-gritty of what's required to do those integration very, very well, because we're seeing a lot of friction today on that level, and we're really committed to bring clarity on this very technical question. So if you are still into CRM and events, make sure to join us on April 11. Chris, thank you very much. Everyone, thanks for joining, and see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Pierre.